If you remember a year ago, we talked about understanding Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes, the Prushim, the Tzdukim, and the Isiim, which were three major groups in Israel 2,000 years ago in Judea at the end of the Second Temple era. Remember, we talked about those three different divisions. And I made an argument then that we're actually a lot more similar to the Essenes in many ways than the Pharisees. A lot of the practices that we do actually go back to the Essenes, including what we did last week, staying up all night on Shavuot. The earliest known reference to staying up all night on Shavuot is from the Essenes. The Essenes used to do this, and many other things. So we talked about that before, that we're actually a lot more similar to the Essenes in many ways than to the Pharisees. So both Jews and Christians make this mistake in saying the rabbis were Pharisees. And Christians say that because Jesus is critical of Pharisees. He calls them hypocrites. He says they pretend to be religious, they make their tefillin large and their tzitzit long, and they don't actually keep any mitzvot and they're whatever and all that stuff. They're fakers. So he criticizes the Pharisees. And what I want to show you is that our rabbis also criticize the Pharisees. The Talmud is actually very critical of the Pharisees. And the Talmud rabbis didn't actually consider themselves Pharisees. They considered the Prushim as another group. And so much so that in Masechet Chagiga, there's even a line there that the rabbis declare that the Prushim are impure. The Amei Haaretz, the ignorant masses, are considered impure when it comes to purity laws because they don't keep the laws, so they don't know what's pure, what's impure. And over there it also says that the Prushim, even though we know that the Prushim are pure because they do maintain purity laws, but just in case we consider them impure because we don't really trust them. Right? So the rabbis didn't actually consider themselves to be Prushim, and they're very critical of Prushim. So I want to show you a few passages that talk about this. There's a Mishnah in Masechet Sotah where Rabbi Yoshua says that there's 4 types of people that destroy the world. Who are the 4 types of people that destroy the world? First is a Chasid Shoteh. A Chasid Shoteh is a pious fool. Somebody who's so religious that they're foolish. They're too extreme. And then a Rasha Arum, a sinner who's a conniving sinner. Somebody who's openly sinful, who's like proud of his sins. A naked sinner. The Isha Prusha, which is a celibate woman. Say, what's wrong with a celibate woman? Why is a celibate woman destroying the world? Well, it's simple, because women reproduce. Women produce produce children. So if you make celibacy for women some kind of virtue, then and you teach women that this is a good thing and they should be celibate, then what ends up happening is you're declining the world's population. And God commanded that you should do the opposite, that you should conquer the earth and you should have more children. So a celibate woman is kind of like the opposite of what God intended, which is that we should be reproducing. We should have bigger families and things like that. So Isha Purusha is also not a good thing because it's like anti-reproduction. And the last one, Umakot Purushin. And the last one is like the self-flagellating Pharisee. Pharisees who are extreme. These 4 types of people destroy the world. Elu mechale olam. They destroy the world. Okay, and then this is the Mishnah in Masechet Sotah. This is where Rabbi Yoshua taught this. And then the Talmud now, like we said, the Talmud is a commentary. We'll explain now. We're going to explain. So the Talmud now explains what this Mishnah means, right? Remember we said Gemara explains Mishnah, that's Talmud. So now the Gemara here on page 21b explains, what does this mean? What did Rabbi Yoshua really mean here? What is a Chasid Shoteh? What is a pious fool? And the Talmud gives an example. What kind of person is a Chasid Shoteh? Kegon, like somebody who sees that Tav'a itata banahara, that a woman is drowning, a woman is bathing in the river, and she's drowning, God forbid. And he says, this Chasid Shoteh, and this person says, I don't want to look at her because she's immodest, because she's bathing, so I'm not going to save her. This is obviously a pious fool. This is a person who's so religious, I don't want to look at an immodest woman, but she's drowning, right? So you obviously need to go and save her, right? This is a person who's like religious so much that he's an idiot, right? So that's not a good thing. That's called a Chasid Shoteh. And by the way, that has a parallel in the New Testament because there's a very famous story of the Good Samaritan. We've all heard the term Good Samaritan. Where does the term Good Samaritan come from? It comes from Luke because there's a very, very famous story where a particular person was dying, was attacked by thieves or whatever, and was lying on the road, bleeding and dying. And a Kohen walks by, and Kohanim are not allowed to be around dead bodies because they cannot have tumat hamet, the impurity of death. So the Kohen, he sees a person's like bleeding to death, and he says, you know what, I'm going to pretend I don't see him, and kind of crosses the road and walks away because he doesn't want to, take care of this person. Probably because if that person dies in his hand, now he's going to be impure, and now he has all these other issues to deal with. So he's so religious, supposedly, that he avoids helping this poor person who's dying. And then the story ends that a Samaritan came, a Samaritan came and actually helped this person. So he's a good Samaritan. Unlike the Cohen, who was clearly a Hasid Shoteh, somebody who's so religious that he's an idiot.
And the Pharisee,
that it said a Cohen and then a Levite, that they didn't want to be around this person, and the Samaritan helped him. So that's a Hasid Shoteh, right? So Jesus said these are the kinds of people that are not good people. Jesus was really talking about a Hasid Shoteh, which is what Rabbi Yoshua is talking about. You're being so religious, he's so worried about purity that he's not going to save. Obviously, in Jewish law, if you see a person who's dying, you go and help them. So that was the Hasid Shoteh. And then the Talmud explains, Tanu Rabbanan Shiva Prushin Hen. There's 7 types of Pharisees. 7 types of Pharisees. And it lists them and says who they are. The first type is called Parush Shichmi, the Pharisees of Shechem. If you remember what happened in Shechem, Chamor, you remember with Dinah, in Shechem, when Yaakov came to live in Shechem, there was a man named Chamor who raped Dinah, the daughter of Yaakov, and then he said, oh, well, I love her, and I'll convert to Judaism to marry her. He said, we'll convert, we'll circumcise ourselves.
He didn't rape her.
Yeah, he raped her.
No, she gave herself to him.
No.
She loved him.
No, it says he raped her. It says, V'ya'aneh.
Really?
Yeah, he raped her. So what is this person? A Pharisee like the people of Shechem, who's a religious for personal gain, like he did. He says, oh yeah, I'll convert to Judaism because they wanted to marry into Yaakov's family, they wanted his wealth, they wanted the daughters. So that's the first type of Pharisee is a Pharisee like those of Shechem, who do it only for personal gain. Parush Nikpi is the second one. This is a person who walks barefoot to injure their feet, to show how, look at me, I'm so religious. Because, you walk barefoot and you get cuts and scrapes and your feet bleed. And he says, look at me, I'm so religious that I walk barefoot. No good. Parush Kizai. Kizai means bloodletting. A Pharisee who's bloodletting. What does that mean, a bloodletting? Remember in the old days, it was popular, it was a medical treatment to release some blood, and it was considered healthy. So what is a Parush Kizai? So the Talmud explains that this is a person like the Hasid Shoteh, meaning he walks down the street and he sees a woman who's immodest, and then he closes his eyes and he crashes into a wall and he cuts himself and he bleeds. That's what it means that he's bloodletting, meaning basically a Hasid Shoteh, somebody who's not going to look at a woman, so he crashes into the wall, or trips and falls and whatever. That's another type. And Parush Meduchya, a Pharisee that's like a pestle, like a mortar and pestle, meaning just like a pestle, the Talmud explains, is bent over, is like curved. So this type of Pharisee walks over, bent over, pretending that he's all humble and meek, but of course he really isn't. And then you have a Parush, this is a funny one, Parush Machovati ve'asena, a Pharisee who says, what is my obligation and I will do it. Right? Just tell me what to do. I don't want to learn Torah, just tell me the halachas, and that's it. I'm done. Just tell me what I need to do. I don't want to learn, I don't want to understand. So now the sages ask, wait, but that's a good thing, no? It's a good thing when you have somebody who's of simple faith and just says, listen, Rabbi, tell me what to do, and I'll do it, right? The Talmud says, no. It's somebody who says, Machovati tu. What else can I do? Give me more restrictions. Somebody who's always adding more chumrot, right? Somebody who wants to be stricter and stricter and stricter. This is no good. This is an extremist. We don't want to make too many restrictions. And then a Parush Me'ava, somebody who's a Pharisee out of love, and a Parush Me'ira, somebody who's a Pharisee out of fear. So again, the Talmud says, but isn't that a good thing? Out of love of God, out of fear of God. Rashi explains, Parush Me'ava, because Me'avat Tzchara Mitzvot, that he's only doing it for the reward. Somebody who's religious only because he wants God to reward him. Not a good thing. And Parush Me'ira, same thing, that he's afraid of Onesh, that he's only doing it because, I keep Shabbat because I don't want God to punish me. Or I keep the law because I don't want God to punish me. That's not the right reason to do it. You do it because it's the right thing to do. You do it because it's God's law, and you want to be holy, and you want to be connected to Hashem. That's why you keep the laws. So those are the 7 types of Pharisees. And the passage ends by saying this. Yanai Malka, the king Yanai, about just over 2,000 years ago, 2,100 years ago, told his wife, he said, Al tityar'i min ha'prushin, don't fear the Pharisees, velo mi she'enan prushin, and don't fear those who aren't Pharisees, ela min hatzvo'in shedomin laprushin, but fear the hypocrites who act like Pharisees, shema'asein kema'aseh zimri, because they act like Zimri, umevakshin tzchar kepinchas, but they ask her for a reward like Pinchas. Remember, Zimri was this leader of one of the Israelite leaders in the wilderness who publicly engaged in some orgy with a Midianite woman. and it was a disgusting, horrible display, and Pinchas killed him to end this, whatever it was, prostitution that was happening. So Yanai said that these Pharisees, some of these hypocrites, be fearful of the hypocritical Pharisees who act like Zimri and want a reward like Pinchas. Because remember, God blessed Pinchas with an eternal priesthood and eternal covenant. So that's what he's saying. So what we learn from this Talmud is, the Talmud is very critical of Pharisees.